For 20 long years, Margaret lived alone in a quiet, forgotten cottage, her days passing in silence, her nights lit by a single lamp in the window. No visitors, no conversations, just memories that refused to fade. Until one stormy night, as rain pounded the roof and thunder shook the walls, a knock came at her door, hesitant, unexpected. On the other side stood a young man, soaked and lost, with eyes full of pain. What began as a simple act of kindness turned into a journey of healing, connection, and second chances, proving it's never too late to be needed again. For over 2 decades, Margaret lived alone in a weathered little cottage at the edge of Willow Lane. The cottage, once filled with laughter and music, had grown quiet, its walls holding memories that only she could hear. The paint peeled from the shutters, and ivy crept along the sides like nature trying to reclaim it. Inside, the air carried the scent of old books and lavender, and every corner held something untouched for years: a photograph, a letter, a forgotten teacup. Margaret's days were a series of gentle repetitions: tea at 7, gardening at 9, a walk by the fence line before the sun dipped too low. She had long ago stopped expecting visitors. The postman no longer delivered letters with familiar handwriting. The phone rarely rang, and when it did, it was only a wrong number or a robocall. Still, every evening, she lit a single lamp by the window, an old habit from when her husband went off to war and she waited for him to return. He never did. And after losing him, then their unborn child a year later, Margaret slowly folded into herself. She refused to leave, as if moving on would erase everything they once had. The town changed around her. New families moved in, old shops turned into supermarkets, children grew up and forgot her name. To them, she was just the quiet woman behind the lace curtains, always watching, always alone. But Margaret wasn't. Bitter, her solitude was a kind of safety, a way to protect the soft, aching parts of her that still believed in kindness, in hope, even if only in whispers. Some nights she would talk to the empty chair across from her, pretending her husband was still listening. Other nights she would hum the lullaby she had once prepared for the child she never got to hold. Her heart was full of stories that had no one left to tell, and yet, something in her never gave up. She still kept that porch light on, even when no one passed by. She still cooked meals big enough for 2, quietly placing the extra plate in front of the empty seat, because somewhere deep down, Margaret believed that life had a way of circling back, and maybe, just maybe, someone would come. Someone who needed her as much as she needed to be needed. It was late, far past the hour when anyone should be out, and the storm outside had grown fierce. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows in their frames. Rain poured in sheets, blurring the world beyond the glass into a smudged watercolor of street lamps and shadows. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the small cottage as if trying to wake it from its slumber. Margaret sat quietly in her armchair, wrapped in a faded knitted shawl, her book resting on her lap, unread for several pages. Her eyes drifted toward the window, watching the storm with a kind of calm acceptance, the same way she watched so many seasons pass. Then it happened, a soft, hesitant knock at the door. At first she thought she imagined it. Who would knock? In a storm like this, who would even think of coming to her door after all these years? She stayed still, heart suddenly fluttering in her chest like a bird roused from its cage. The knock came again, firmer this time, but still unsure, like someone not entirely convinced they deserved help. Margaret slowly rose, her bones stiff from sitting too long, her steps cautious as she crossed the creaky floorboards. She reached the door and hesitated. Her hand hovered over the handle as her mind raced. Was it a trick? A lost traveler? A ghost from her past? The last thought made her chest ache. She hadn't opened that door for a soul in years, not since her sister's funeral when the last of her family disappeared like smoke. With a deep breath, she turned the knob. Standing there, drenched from head to toe, was a young man, no older than 20, with hollow cheeks and frightened eyes. His soaked hoodie clung to his thin frame, and water dripped steadily onto the doormat. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her with a mixture of desperation and disbelief, as though he hadn't expected anyone to answer. "I'm sorry," he finally said, voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Margaret blinked. She hadn't heard another human voice in her home in what felt like a lifetime. Without another word, she opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in," she said gently. "You're safe here." And just like that, the silence of 20 years was broken not by thunder, but by kindness. Margaret led the boy into the small, warm kitchen, the soft glow from the overhead lamp casting gentle shadows on the walls. She didn't ask too many questions, not yet. Instead, she handed him a towel, pointed to the chair near the old stove, and began preparing something hot. The boy sat quietly, his soaked clothes steaming as the warmth of the room slowly thawed him. His hands, thin and trembling, wrapped tightly around the mug of tea she placed before him. For a while, they didn't speak. Only the sound of rain on the roof and the soft bubbling of the soup on the stove filled the space between them. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like it hadn't been used in days. "My name's Jacob," he said. "I've been walking for hours. I didn't mean to bother anyone. He trailed off, unable to finish. Margaret didn't press. She set a bowl of soup in front of him and sat across the table. Her eyes kind but steady. "Everyone ends up somewhere when they're lost," she said softly. Jacob looked at her, confusion and pain flickering in his gaze. "I don't have anyone left," he admitted. "I messed things up. My mum, she gave up on me. I left home, been sleeping in alleys, stealing just to get by. Tonight I thought maybe this storm would wash me away." Margaret reached across the table and gently laid her hand over his. Her skin was wrinkled and cool, but her touch held a strength that surprised him. "We all carry things too heavy for others to see," she said. "That doesn't mean we stop trying." Jacob looked down, a single tear falling into the soup he hadn't touched. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time, without judgment, without fear, just kindness, pure and undeserved. In that moment something shifted. The cold inside him, the emptiness he'd carried for so long, began to crack. It wasn't just the warmth of the room or the food in front of him. It was the realization that even in a stranger's home, soaked and broken, he could still be seen as human, still be offered grace. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob took a deep breath and let it out. Days passed, then weeks. The storm had long since cleared, but Jacob remained. Not because Margaret asked him to stay, she never did, but because something about the quiet rhythm of her life felt like a balm to his frayed soul. He began waking early to help her tend the garden, learning the names of herbs and flowers he had never cared about before. He fixed the broken fence out front, mowed the overgrown lawn, and even repaired the wobbly porch step she had simply gotten used to stepping over. It wasn't much, but it made the cottage feel alive again. Margaret, in turn, found herself moving with more purpose. She started baking again, teaching Jacob how to knead bread until their hands were coated in flour and laughter. She shared stories of her youth, how she once dreamed of being a painter, how she met her husband at a town dance, how quiet the world became after she lost everything. She didn't speak with sorrow, but with a gentleness that showed she had made peace with her pain. They didn't need to talk about why Jacob had run, or what Margaret had been waiting for. Somehow they both understood it wasn't about fixing each other. It was about simply being there. Two broken hearts, not trying to fill the silence with explanations, but letting kindness grow in the quiet. Jacob began to change. His eyes, once guarded, softened. He started writing in a notebook Margaret had given him, just little thoughts, memories, hopes he was scared to say out loud. He even laughed sometimes, a sound that startled them both the first time it escaped. And Margaret, she started setting two places at the table without thinking. Her home, once a shrine to the past, now hummed with the comfort of shared meals, light conversations, and the healing power of presence. They weren't family by blood, but they had become something just as real to people who, by chance or fate, had found in each other the permission to begin again. One crisp spring morning, Margaret woke to find the house unusually quiet. Jacob's shoes were gone from the doorway, and on the kitchen table lay a folded piece of paper with her name written in his careful, shaky handwriting. She opened it, slowly, her hands trembling. "Margaret, thank you for seeing me when no one else would. You gave me a home when I didn't deserve one. I'm going to make things right with my mum, with myself. I need to try, but I'll be back. You're the first person who ever made me believe I was worth coming back to. Thank you for loving a stranger like family." Jacob, tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a beginning. She waited. Days turned into weeks. And just when the ache of absence began to return, another knock came, this time, steady and sure. Margaret opened the door, heart pounding, and there he was. Jacob stood tall, cleaner, stronger. His eyes were still the same, but this time they held something new, peace, and he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, older, worn, but smiling with eyes full of apology and hope. His mother. Margaret stepped aside with tears streaming freely, arms open. No words were needed. From that day on, the house on Willow Lane was never quiet again. It rang with voices, with music, with life. Margaret's table was always full. Her lamp still glowed in the window at night, but not out of hope for someone to come. It shone now as a beacon of welcome for anyone in need. She had lived alone for 20 years, but in the end, all it took was one knock on a stormy night to remind her that even the loneliest hearts can still be found and still be loved. And sometimes when we open the door to someone else's brokenness, we find the healing we never knew we were waiting for.